The sea was deceptively calm when the SS Lamoricière left the port of Algiers on January 8, 1942. Families waved from the docks, children leaned over the rails to watch the city shrink, and soldiers smoked cigarettes as the liner's engines throbbed beneath their feet. No one knew it would be the last time they saw land. The Mediterranean was always unpredictable, but in wartime, even the simplest voyage carried a shadow of danger. The passengers boarded anyway. They were mothers carrying children, businessmen clutching briefcases, soldiers heading home, and crew who had done the journey countless times. The Lamoricière was not the proud ship she once was, but she was all they had. She had been launched in 1920, when the world was still recovering from the First World War. In her early days, she had been called Elegant, a vessel that linked Marseille with North Africa, carrying mail, cargo, and travelers. But 2 decades later, she was aging. Her coal-fired engines had been hastily converted to burn oil, and when war shortages left her without proper fuel, she was loaded instead with coal briquettes, far less efficient, robbing her of power. Her hull was weathered, her fittings outdated, and her pumps weakened by years of use. Wartime left little room for luxury liners. Any ship that could sail, sailed, no matter the condition. And so the Lamoricière was sent back across the sea, carrying 272 passengers and crew toward France. For the first hours of the voyage, the ship held steady. Passengers settled in as best they could. In the dining saloon, stewards served simple wartime meals, thin soup, bread, strong coffee. Conversations murmured over the clatter of cutlery. A mother tried to quiet her restless child with a lullaby. 2 young soldiers played cards at a corner table, their laughter forced but welcome in a room thick with anxiety. The Lamoricière rolled gently, nothing out of the ordinary, but the horizon darkened as they steamed north, and the sea began to rise. By the following morning, the storm had arrived in full fury. The winds shrieked through the rigging, tearing at canvas and rattling doors in their frames. Rain hammered the decks until the planks glistened like black glass. Waves towered over the bow, crashing down with such violence the entire ship shuddered. Inside, lamps flickered, crockery shattered, and furniture slid across the floor. The sounds were deafening, metal groaning, wood splintering, water pounding from every side. Passengers clung to each other, praying, screaming, some struck mute with terror. Mothers shielded children beneath blankets. Soldiers who had faced gunfire now stared helplessly at a sea that seemed intent on swallowing them whole. The crew worked furiously. They manned the pumps, sealing bulkheads, trying to keep the flooding at bay. But the converted engines faltered, robbed of strength by the inferior fuel. When the propellers slowed, the ship turned broadside to the waves, rolling so violently that even the seasoned sailors believed she would capsize. Orders were shouted, but the storm swallowed every word. The captain knew what the crew already feared. The Lamoricière was dying. When the order to abandon ship came, chaos erupted. Lifeboats swung wildly on their davits, smashing against the hull or capsizing as they hit the water. Passengers crowded the decks, desperate for space in the few boats that could be lowered. Some leapt into the sea, clutching planks or life rings, vanishing in the spray. Others froze, unable to move, as walls of water broke over the rails and swept people away in seconds. Survivors would later say the screams of the drowning echoed louder than the storm itself, then faded one by one until there was only the roar of the sea. By midday on January 9th, the Lamoricière gave her final lurch. Water poured into the holds, the engines choked, and she listed hard to one side. In a single heave, she slid beneath the waves, disappearing into the depths, with more than 300 souls still aboard. The silence that followed was broken only by the cries of those struggling in the water, their heads rising and falling with the whitecaps. Rescue ships responded to her distress call. A few vessels in the area braved the storm to search for survivors, their crews risking their own lives in seas that threatened to sink them as well. They pulled shivering men and women from wreckage, their fingers blue, their eyes hollow. Survivors told of clinging to planks for hours, of watching loved ones slip away beside them. One woman described holding her child until the waves tore him from her arms. By the time the rescuers could do no more, 301 people were dead. Barely a fraction of those aboard had survived. In Marseille, widows waited at the harbor for husbands who would never return. In Algiers, children asked why their fathers were gone. For families, the grief was immeasurable. Yet beyond those circles of mourning, the world scarcely noticed. It was 1942. Battles raged in North Africa. German armies surged across Russia. Cities were being bombed, civilians slaughtered daily. Newspapers mentioned the loss of the Lamoricière, but the story was buried beneath headlines of war. In another time, her sinking would have been a national tragedy. In wartime, it was reduced to a footnote. An inquiry followed, but its conclusions offered little comfort. The Lamoricière was too old, too weak, and too poorly equipped to survive such a storm. She had been sent to sea with inadequate fuel, unreliable engines, and no margin for error. The storm exposed every weakness. Wartime desperation had condemned her before she ever left port. The passengers, most of them civilians, never truly had a chance. Today, her wreck lies somewhere on the floor of the Mediterranean, rusting in the dark, a tomb for hundreds whose names are largely forgotten. No great monument was built, no annual remembrance draws crowds. She has been swallowed not only by the sea, but by history itself, eclipsed by the greater horrors of the war. Yet her story lingers in fragments, in survivor testimonies, in yellowed newspaper clippings, in the grief of families who never saw justice or answers. The Lamoricière's fate is a reminder that war's toll was not only measured in battles and bombs, it was also in quiet tragedies at sea, in the cries of families lost in storms, in ships unfit for the journeys they were forced to make. These deaths were not recorded on battlefields, but they were no less cruel, no less final. The storm of January 1942 was merciless. The Lamoricière fought until her strength was gone, betrayed by her age and by the desperate times that kept her sailing. In the end, it was not torpedoes or bombs that destroyed her. It was the sea itself, claiming lives that history barely paused to record. Thank you for listening to the Sunken Ledger. Subscribe for more true stories from the depths.